Hey everyone, welcome back to the author reading of Throne of Deceit. This week we're doing chapters 13 and 14, and pdmac is, of course, back with me. So we will pick up where we left off, and we hope you enjoy it. Chapter 13. We have to launch the attack now, Gwen demanded. Eridor raised his hands placatingly. We're working on it. Roland and Tobias have gathered enough men to overtake it, but I want you to have a rune before you go. If you are a quick learner, you'll be on your way to the outpost before midday. My father could be dead by then. You could die if you go to the outpost without some form of protection, Eridor replied calmly. I can carry a sword, Gwen said, but she knew he was right. Can you wield one? Have you learned to fight against trained soldiers? Gwen recognized she was on the losing end of the debate and sighed. No, I've never even held one before. Well, one time I did, but it was to move it off the table at my father's inn. I rest my case, Eridor said. I know it is difficult, but try to be patient. We will rescue Boris, but everything must be in place. It's risky. I get it, Gwen huffed. That's not all. The rebellion isn't strong enough to face the king's forces head on. We must be strategic, calculated. Any loss we suffer will push us further back than we already are. Fine. I'll wait for Emil, and when I've gained the rune, we go. Agreed. Eridor made an odd gesture with his hand, and a pile of folded clothes appeared on the bed beside Gwen. I've taken the liberty of getting you some new garments. What's wrong with these ones? Gwen asked, brow furrowed. Eridor opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. He lifted a finger into the air and opened his mouth again, then frowned. I'm kidding, Gwen said. These ones are dirty, and I feel disgusting. The hint of a smile pulled at Eridor's lips. Funny. You can use the bathing chamber to clean up. It's on the floor below this one. When you're done, we'll have breakfast, and then Emil should be here. Gwen was relieved to hear that she could get clean and headed straight for the bathing chamber after Eridor left. She took her new clothes with her and set them on a side table. There was a wooden basin filled with water, and Gwen dipped a finger into it. To her surprise, the water wasn't cold. She stripped her dirty clothes off and climbed into the tub. As much as Gwen wanted to relax in the water and forget her problems, there was too much going on. She felt guilty for not already going to free her father, but she couldn't take on an outpost on her own. Not yet, anyway. If what Eridor said about magic was true, then she could gain the power she needed to stop any injustice. Gwen got out of the basin and dried off with a long cloth, then put on the clothes Eridor had given her. The black pants were soft and felt like silk, but the material was thick and clung tightly to her skin. The shirt was also black, but it was loose-fitting. There was something about the shirt that made her skin tingle, and she made a note to ask Eridor about it. When she returned upstairs, Eridor was sitting on the terrace with a dark-haired woman that Gwen assumed was Emil. Ah, here she is, Eridor said as Gwen joined them. Emil, this is Gwen. Gwen's eyes widened when she looked upon Emil. Runes were branded from her wrists up the length of her arms, disappearing under the short sleeves of her leather armor. There were runes on her face as well, one under each of her eyes. Every rune was completely unique from the others. Gwen took a seat at the table and tried not to stare. It's nice to meet you, Emil said. Eridor says you have some hesitancy about being a mage. A little, Gwen admitted. I've been where you are, so I can relate. It was long ago, but I remember the emotions like it was only yesterday. Gwen assumed Emil was around her age, just past 22 years. Her hair was brown, and her skin was as dark as night. The branded runes looked like scars, but Gwen didn't find them as abrasive looking as she imagined. The more she studied Emil's arms, the more she started to like the runes. We're getting ready to strike the outpost outside Dallsbury, Eridor said. Truly? Emil asked, surprised. Yes, I confess it's a little premature, but Boris and a few other members of the rebellion are imprisoned. They're too valuable to lose, and Gwen is Boris's adopted daughter. Tobias said the same thing, Gwen interjected. I'm having trouble believing that. We can ask Boris about it when we rescue him, but I can assure you we have no reason to lie to you, Eridor said. I don't think you're lying. I just think you're mistaken, Gwen replied. There is a way to find out for certain, Emil said. That caught Gwen's attention. How? There's a place in the kingdom of Steepcross that can reveal a mage's true name. It's southeast of here, but if you want to know bad enough, the journey is worth it. I'll keep that in mind. Tell me about the rune you can show me. You're an eager one, aren't you? Emil asked, cracking a smile. I want to rescue my father, but Eridor won't let me leave until I've learned a rune. Eridor is wise, and I agree with him on this. There are many runes that you can learn, but the first one is the hardest, most painful. Painful? Gwen asked. Yes. Once you learn the rune, it is burned into your flesh. The first rune has crippled many mages, but it's temporary. Even if it doesn't incapacitate you, it will hurt. Gwen could feel her anxiety rising again, but she kept the thought of her father in the forefront of her mind, and it kept her from giving in. Is every mage's first rune the same? No, Emil answered. Every mage can choose their first rune, to an extent. What do you mean? Gwen asked. Well, most runes you learn will come from another mage teaching it to you. As you can see, Emil lifted her arms for emphasis, I have learned many. You can choose from my runes which one you want to learn. What if I want to learn more than one? You can't. A mage can only give one rune to another mage. Why? Gwen asked. Well, no one is really sure, Emil replied. It's been a mystery for as long as there has been magic. So to get more runes, I have to find other mages to teach me? Yes, but I would offer a word of caution. Not all mages are willing to share their secrets, so you will encounter mages who will refuse your request. They are few, though. Mages tend to favor academia, so most are open to teaching others. What kind of runes do you have? Gwen leaned closer, looking over the numerous brands. There was one that caught her attention. It was shaped like a flower surrounded by a circle. What is that one? I want to try something, Emil said. Instead of telling you what my runes do, I want you to look at each one and tell me which you are most drawn to. Before we do that, though, I want to eat something. I'm famished. Gwen had completely forgotten about food in the midst of her curiosity. She had to force herself to be patient as they ate a small meal composed of eggs and roasted potatoes. Eridor and Emil chatted about various things that Gwen found dull compared to magic. She cut a piece of bread from a fresh loaf and chewed on it as she agonized over how slow time was passing. She had zoned out as she pondered who her real parents might be, assuming what Tobias and Eridor had said was true. Perhaps she came from a family of prestigious. That would explain her magical inclination. Yet, why would they have abandoned her? Maybe she was born to a family that had an aversion to magic and feared having a prestige as a daughter. Gwen was so deep in thought she hadn't noticed Emil was looking at her. I'm sorry? I asked if you were ready to pick a rune, Emil replied. Yes, I'm ready. Emil laid her arms out on the table. Look at each one. Take in the details and point to the ones that stand out to you. At first, Gwen thought the task would be easy, yet as she studied the runes, it became apparent that it would take some time to see them all. Once she'd viewed all the runes on Emil's arms, the woman stood and removed her upper armor, exposing her nakedness. Gwen's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but Eridor's expression remained impassive. Keep going, Emil said. Gwen hesitantly continued perusing the runes. Emil had more than Gwen could keep count of, and she wondered how long it had taken the woman to learn them all. The scarred brands continued from her arms and across her chest. Gwen made a pained look when she saw they were even on Emil's breasts. Her stomach was smooth, unmarred flesh, but the runes wound around to her neck. There was one that looked like a wing that caught her attention. Gwen touched it softly. The wing, Emil said. How did you know which one I touched? Gwen asked. I know my body, she said. It was all she offered as an explanation. Gwen continued and touched one that looked like two cresting waves of water. She touched another that resembled what she thought was a fish, and the last one that looked like a serpent, though its body was a zigzag. Emil removed her pants, leaving her intimate area covered only by a loincloth. Again, Gwen blushed, but she knelt and examined the runes on Emil's legs. There were none there that drew her eye, and she stood. Is that all of them? Gwen asked. There is one more, but you don't need to see it. Its only purpose is for pleasure. Gwen thought for sure that her cheeks couldn't get any hotter, but they burned more fiercely at Emil's words. You've chosen 4, Eridor said, yet you can only have one. Which one pulls at you the most? Emil asked. Gwen looked at the one she had picked again, and she was most drawn to the undulated snake. That one, she said, touching it. The snake. Interesting, Emil said. What? Gwen asked. Nothing. It's a good choice. That's a powerful rune, though. You're definitely going to feel this one. That caused Gwen some concern, but she had quickly come to realize from their conversation that power would come at a cost. So how does this work? What do I need to do? We need to go somewhere higher, Emil said, looking at Eridor. The elf smiled knowingly and rose from his chair. Follow me. He led them to a stairway that only went upward and eventually reached the ceiling. A rectangular metal door rested in the center, surrounded by stones. Eridor pushed the door up, and they stepped out onto the roof of the tower. Gwen looked around, confused. Other than the tower, she could see nothing but thick gray fog. What is that? She asked. It is the ether, Eridor answered. Remember, the top of this tower exists outside of the natural world. It's basically a pocket of space carved out magically, much like a cave, Emil said. Wizard stuff. Gwen nodded, but it didn't make any sense to her. She walked to the edge of the roof and looked down. The city of Penshaw was nothing more than a speck far below. Gwen backed away, afraid she might slip and fall to her death. You're going to need some protection, Emil told Eridor. He closed his eyes and muttered something. A sphere of shifting green energy surrounded him. I want you to close your eyes, Emil said. Clear your mind of everything. It might be difficult, but you must have no distractions. Gwen did as Emil asked and closed her eyes, but she was having trouble purging her thoughts. It took a long while, but neither Eridor nor Emil rushed her. When her mind was clear, she saw the zigzag snake rune floating in the darkness, similar to her experience with the Bunis rune. Speak it, a voice whispered in her mind. She recognized it as Emil's. It sounded like an echo, and it repeated several times before fading. Gwen focused intently on the rune, but it was fuzzy and the name evaded her. She envisioned her hand and reached for it. Intense heat assaulted her and she jerked away. You can do it, Emil's voice echoed. Gwen clenched her jaw and reached again. She ignored the heat and this time managed to grasp the rune. She pulled it closer until the fuzziness became clear and the name of the rune hit her like a blow. Tintreach, she uttered aloud. Searing light suddenly filled the darkness. Gwen opened her eyes, but the light was still there, blinding her, burning her. She screamed, but if any sound came out, she didn't hear it. Her heartbeat slowed, but each beat was excruciatingly loud. She'd gone blind, and deafness followed. Gwen had a feeling of weightlessness, like gravity no longer existed for her. The light faded, and as her vision cleared, she realized why she felt so light. She'd fallen off the tower.
Chapter 14. Coddle. Okay, suppose I accept that I'm the long-lost son of some dead king. He was your father, Brack gently scolded. You should show some respect. Why? Coddle challenged. I never knew him. I feel nothing for him. You don't know him because he sent you away to protect you. From whom? Torian. Torian? The guy who wants me dead? How old is this guy? Not as old as you think, Brock cryptically answered. Perhaps I'd better explain. Would you like something to drink? Is this a long story? I'll make it brief, Brock replied, taking iron poker by the fireplace and jabbing at the embers. Your father, King Cameron, ruled the kingdom of Isentol. He had 2 children. Well, that's right, Connell interrupted. I supposedly have a sister. Where's she? I don't know. She is not my concern. Okay, so there are others like you looking for her? Brack turned to appraise the young man, brash yet quite intelligent. Not only those like me, remember. Torian too has his henchman looking for her. Connell tilted his head and thought. If he sent me as far west as possible, logically, he would have sent my sister in the opposite direction, as far east as possible. A logical assumption, Brack acknowledged with a nod. What he might have thought his enemies would think the same thing. Good point. Yeah, forget it. You were saying? Cameron sent his children to safety to be raised by noble-hearted parents, people whose trust and faithfulness were beyond question. Connell bolted his standing. My God, anyone who thinks I'm Cameron's son knows where my parents are. We need to get back. We got to save them. Brock turned solemn. It's too late to go back. Connell's eyes hardened and his jaw clenched. They're dead. Connell blinked tears away. When? Almost a year ago. Connell sucked in her breath. A year ago? Guilt washed through him. Here he was, complaining about Cameron when he was less than a dutiful son. He had justified his absence as necessary in order to accumulate wealth. He was going to surprise them, return the wealthy son and set up shop with his father. His parents would be proud. But wealth was elusive, and he had drifted farther away. There was nothing you could have done, Brack soothed. They knew the risk involved. Connell's heart thumped, afraid of the answer to his next question. What about my brother and sisters? Brack shook his head. Connell clenched his fist and snarled. Someone is going to pay for this. Wait a minute. You said this happened a year ago. Why would you even know about it? I was alerted when Torian's assassins descended on Hervé. Not long after their arrival, a jeweler and his family were caught in a fire. Coincidence? Hardly. Though assassins are good, they're still human. I have a friend in Hervé who stumbled on the assassins in the act, who was lucky to escape alive. It caused me to wonder why Torian would send his friend so far. I've been waiting and watching ever since. Now that you were here, a piece of the puzzle has been solved, a very big piece. Connell inhaled an angry breath. Like I said, someone is going to pay for this. And so they should, Brack agreed. But we can't go off without a plan. Connell folded his arms and stared into the fire. My destiny is to reclaim my father's kingdom? Yes. How can I do that? I have no army, no followers, and certainly no resources. It's not like I can walk in and shout, hey, I'm Cameron's son. Get off my throne. And how am I going to convince anyone if I'm not convinced myself? Things are already moving. It's just a question of fitting in and adapting them to your needs. Still, there are a few things you need to know. Like what? Connell crossed back to his chair and sat, slouching back, his arms folded. His anger still smoldering, his mind raced with the methods of pain he would inflict on those responsible for his family's deaths. He knew he should feel intense sadness, but the only emotion that swirled within him was vengeance. Well, for starters, Torian just happens to be your uncle. Bragg placed the poker in the stand and pulled the chair out farther from the desk and sat. Connell's head flopped back as he stared at the granite ceiling. Why does that not surprise me? What you're telling me is that my uncle killed both my real father and my other father and family. Yes. Why? You know the old saying, the more power a man has, the more he wants. The more he wants, the more he will do to get it. Your uncle was not satisfied to be number two. And then there is Grimmer the Mage Breaker. It seems that all the trouble started when Grimmer came to Torian's court. Back to my original question, Connell said. How am I supposed to overthrow a king when I have no assets or resources? We get them along the way, Bragg smiled. Starting in Garamdur. The Dwarf Kingdom? I thought you said the Dwarf King was under Grimmer's spell. He is. We must break the chain that binds him to Grimmer. Oh, and how do we do that? We must remove Grimmer's man, Havard Twin Tongue. Twin Tongue. Remember what I said? Havard is not one to be trifled with. He's called Twin Tongue because it has the power of words and voice. In one instant, he'll convince you to follow him, and the next instant, hand you a knife and tell you to kill yourself to prove your devotion. And you would do it. To defeat him, you must not be allowed to speak. Once anyone hears his voice, they're condemned to follow his words. By the gods, Connell marveled. Had I that gift, I'd be a rich man by now. And maybe my family would still be alive. Wanting wealth is oftentimes like wanting power, Bragg quietly reminded him. The more one gets, the more one wants. Sort of moot at the moment, Connell grimly chuckled. So where do we start? I mean, what's the plan? How do we get to this Havard guy without getting trapped? Very carefully. Connell shook his head in irritation. I'm serious. Right now, there's you and me, not overwhelming odds. Help is on the way. In fact, he should be here any moment. He? That's it? One more person? His retort was interrupted by the sound of a hidden door scraping open, causing him to jerk upright and swivel around in time to see Drustin and Onan enter. Connell leaped up, his eyes darting back to Bryac, whose welcoming smile to the visitors told him that he had been betrayed. I was hoping he was with you, Drustin smiled back. Seeing the panic in Connell's eyes, he soothed. Perhaps I was hasty, my young friend. I'm not your friend. Connell shat back and then turned to Bryac. You bastard. It's not what you think, Bryac placated. You don't know what I think. Maybe if you shut up and listen, Ronan snipped, you'd learn the truth. At that moment, two dwarves stepped into the room, the door closing behind them. How about something to drink? Torgrith grinned. A nice cold ale would do. Connell's mouth gaped wide. Torgrith? Voldar? At your service, Voldar replied with a sweeping bow. Connell's brow bent in a deep furrow as his head twitched and his gaze flickered from one person to another. When none of them made any threatening gestures, he jammed his arms on his hips. Will someone please explain what's going on? That's better, Ronan said. I'll let the two druids explain. I could use a nail. Without waiting for a reply, he headed for the door, turning to the dwarves. You coming? Wouldn't miss a cold brew, Voldor readily agreed, catching up, Torgrith on his heels. Once Ronan and the two dwarfs left the room, Drustin narrowed his gaze at Connell. You're a hard man to keep up with. When Connell didn't reply, he said, Perhaps I was hasty in my initial assessment. Why did you run? You wanted to kill me, Connell retorted. I never said that, he lied. Maybe not to me. Connell gave him a look that said he knew the man's intent. Drustin rarely studied the young man. How could he have known what was said to Ronan? Like I said, I may have been hasty. So you admit you wanted me dead? Connell curled a lip. Suppose you had succeeded. I was wrong, Drustin huffed. Can we move on? You're not dead. What's done is done. Is that some sort of apology? Gee, so sorry I meant to kill you. Nothing personal, you understand, just business. Connell flopped back in his chair, crossing a leg over the other. Yes, it was just business, Drustin answered, a smile curling the corners of his lips. I made a snap decision that you might be in the way. I was wrong. Fortunately, you were faster than I expected. After I explained my purpose to Voldar and Torgreth, they agreed to return with me to find you. Luckily, Brack was here to keep you safe. Connell's look said he wasn't convinced. So, do you think I'm the long-lost son of King what's-his-name? He's your father, Brack reprimanded, and he has a name. Use it. Okay, King Cameron. Apparently, I'm not the only one unconvinced, Drustin taunted. Well, look at it from my point of view, Connell said, rolling his eyes. Going from highwayman to king's son is quite a stretch. Drustin turned to Brack. Have you found anything? I was about to try the naming bone when you arrived. What's that? Connell asked. A name is an essence, Brack explained. When parents give a child a name, it connects who they are with what they intend their child's future to be. It is a future and a history at the same time. And the bone? It will show us if you are who we believe you to be. Will it hurt? Connell groused, remembering the two instances of pain. Not in the same way, Brack answered. It is not physical pain. Sometimes there's no pain at all, Drustin added. It all depends on the parents and child. Links are strongest between father and son or mother and daughter. Though rare, links can cross. When that happens, it means the dominant parent has implanted the child's future. Connell exhaled an exasperated sigh. All this mumbo jumbo. The bottom line is, what will the naming bond tell you? It will tell us the truth of your connection, Brack said. I assume I have a birth name? Yes, Darby. Darby? Connell blurted. My father named me Darby? What kind of name is that? It means one who is free from hatred and envy. You don't like it? Brack asked. I am not going to be called Darby, Connell exclaimed. I don't care who my father is. That is your choice, Drustin said. But for now, consent to use the name so we can establish heritage. Darby, Connell sneered. Sounds like a girl's name. Looking at them, he asked, what's my sister's name? Her real name or the name she's using, Brack replied. Both. We don't know the name she's using, but her birth name is Quinley. It means woman of wisdom and insight. Connell curled a lip. Our parents named us Darby and Quinley. What is wrong with them? What kind of parent would name their kids Darby and Quinley? This sounds like some part of a joke. Can we proceed? Drustin interrupted. You can rant and rage later. Yeah, sure. But Darby, I mean, come on. Free from envy and hatred? Talk about way off the mark. First thing I'm going to do when I find Oscan is torture living stuffing out of him and then kill him. How's that for being free of hatred? Shall we begin? Brack said, ignoring him. Pulling out the bottom right drawer of the desk, he lifted out something wrapped in cloth. Placing it on the desktop, he unwrapped it, displaying an animal bone with runes carved into it. This is a naming bone, he explained. It will give us the answers we seek. What animal? Connell asked. It is from the femur of a stag. Is a stag required? Yes, now quit interrupting. He handed the bone to Connell. All you need to do is to hold the bone with both hands and say, I am Darby. The bone will do the rest. That's it? Connell regarded the bone in his hands. It was smooth, sliced clean at both ends. Engraved in black letters were runes and symbols he didn't recognize or understand. Inhaling a deep breath, he placed his feet shoulder width apart and grasped the bone with both hands. Might as well get this over with. I am Darby. The bone grew warmer, and a faint orange glow surrounded the bone and his hands. Suddenly he was filled with an overwhelming grief, like watching someone he loved executed before his eyes. His eyes slammed shut as the vision consumed him. Blood pooled beneath the body of a man of the ground, his purple robe stained. The jeweled crown that once adorned his head lay close by. Beside him, a lovely woman wearing a golden crown slumped to her knees, the hilt of a dagger protruding from her chest. He cried out as she slumped to the ground. His hand involuntarily shot out as though trying to catch her. Her head slowly turned, and her eyes found his. With her last breaths, she smiled and mouthed the words, my son. Connell cried out and flung the bone from his hands. Opening his eyes, he felt hot and wiped away the sweat from his forehead and face. His hands felt even hotter, and looked down to see the ruins slowly fading from his palms. Shifting a look between Drewston and Brack, whose satisfied grin told him they were pleased with the results, he said, well, what did you see? Connell related the vision and the pain he felt. You didn't see it because your eyes were closed, Brack commented, but the color surrounding your hands turned from orange to pure white. This means you are truly Cameron's son. Stunned, Connell remained rooted to the floor, trying to make sense of everything. He had hoped it was all a mistake, that he could go back to the way things were before. But then he remembered that nothing was the same anymore. His family was dead, and now he was a king's son. I need a drink. That can be arranged, Brack chuckled. By the way, Drewston casually said, what do you know about dragons?
And that's a wrap for this week. Thanks for listening, guys, and following. And if you're not subscribed, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can get updated every time we upload a new video each week. And with that said, we'll see you next week.